In February 2018, a young Mexican woman was brutally attacked in her own home. And that's how one of the most shocking cases in Mexico in recent years began. But not just because of the brutality of her murder, but because one of the suspects was someone very close to the victim. If you want to know everything that happened, stay with me until the end of the video. Hi everyone, how are you? My name is Lesma. I hope you're doing great. As always, I'm so happy to be here with you for another day and very grateful that you're watching me from wherever you are. Today we have a case that happened in Mexico, that of Bianca Moreno La Bastida. Join me to see all the details. Bianca Fernanda Moreno La Bastida was born on May 3, 1986 in Querétaro, Mexico. She was the daughter of a woman named Bianca Yesenia La Bastida Contreras, who was originally from the state of Mexico, but had moved to Querétaro looking for better opportunities. Bianca was her mother's only child, and this led them to develop a very close and trusting relationship. They had a genuine bond, and her mother was the girl's main support in every decision she made. From a very young age, Bianca showed an interest in sports, something they said she had inherited from her father, and in which she performed with great ease, especially in tennis and track and field. Everyone who knew her described her as a bold, down-to-earth and very hard-working girl, as well as kind, loving, and very calm. At 17, Bianca made a very important decision. She would move to Spain to study fashion design. Even though this trip meant she and her mother would be separated, her mother gave her unconditional support. And so the girl moved to Barcelona. After living there for a year and a half, she obtained her permanent residency. She then moved to San Sebastián, where she completed a university degree in human resources. During her time in Spain, she met a guy named Alan, with whom she started a romantic relationship. But after 10 years of living in the European country, Bianca decided to return to Mexico with her boyfriend to reunite with her mother. Initially, the couple had planned to settle in Veracruz. However, Bianca's mother didn't agree, as she felt it wasn't a very safe region and advised them on other options. That was how Alan and Bianca ended up in Playa del Carmen, in Quintana Roo. Shortly after, the young woman began studying for a second degree which she was very passionate about, business administration, and she finished it in June 2017. Meanwhile, she made a living with a part-time job at a brand-name clothing store, and was also a CrossFit trainer, something she practiced with aerobic and anaerobic exercises. Because of these workouts, it's also known that she became close friends with some gym mates. That was how, during the next 4 years in Playa del Carmen, things seemed to be going very well for Bianca and her boyfriend, and contact with the girl's mother was very frequent. Every evening after work, Bianca and Yesenia would talk on the phone and tell each other how their day had gone. But things for Bianca didn't end very well in the end. The relationship with Alan began to deteriorate, until they finally split up in January 2018. So, Bianca left the home she shared with him and moved in with a gym mate named Adi Candelaria Almeida Chavez, 38 years old, who offered to rent her a room. Adi worked as an elementary school teacher and personal trainer, and was also part of Bianca's close circle in the gym world. Besides this, they also had a friend named Mar, who was a trainer at the gym, and another man named Mattia, who was Italian. In the end, it all seemed like a new beginning for Bianca. With this background, we come to Wednesday, February 21, 2018. Bianca got up very early and left the house to go train, just like she did every day. Then she went to work, and in the afternoon she met up with a friend for coffee. After hanging out for a bit, the young woman told her friend she had to go home to change, because she had a date that night. But she didn't reveal who it was with. Bianca then left the place and went home to get ready. Around 10 at night, Yesenia's phone rang and she answered, expecting to find her daughter on the other end of the line. But to her surprise, it wasn't Bianca, but her roommate, Adi, who, with a somewhat shaky voice, told her that someone had broken into the house to rob it, and that Bianca had been hurt. The information Addie gave her was confusing, but she managed to understand that during the robbery, Bianca was hit on the head and wouldn't stop bleeding from her nose, so she was taken to a hospital. At that point, Yesenia had no idea how the young woman was doing, so she immediately started making arrangements to travel from Querétaro to Quintana Roo. But there were no flights that night, so she chose to call Alan, her daughter's ex-boyfriend, with whom she still had a good relationship. She asked him to go to the hospital to find out what was going on. Alan was at a soccer game and left immediately. He headed as fast as he could to the medical center where Bianca was, and it was there that he found out the young woman had passed away just a few minutes after being admitted. Bianca was 31 years old. According to Addie, at that moment she claimed to have found her severely injured and with her face disfigured in addition to a severe blow to the head. The ones who called the ambulance were some neighbors, and as it turned out, it took the paramedics over 40 minutes to arrive at the house. It was also learned that she was first taken to a private clinic where she wasn't treated, and after that they took her to a public hospital, but it was too late. Despite the shock of the news, Alan's first instinct was to call Yesenia, but he didn't have time to do it, because police officers arrived to investigate, and instead of talking to him, they handcuffed him and took him to a station for questioning. After all, he was Bianca's ex and they treated him as the prime suspect in the crime. Yesenia spent that whole night in uncertainty, and the next morning when she arrived at the hospital, they told her she had to go to the morgue to identify her daughter's body. The woman said she could see the signs of violence on Bianca's body. Her face was practically unrecognizable, and she also had some marks on her neck. According to the forensic report, these marks were because someone had tried to strangle the young woman, but the actual cause of death was a blow with a blunt object. Initially, the prosecution treated the case as a robbery with violence, but for Bianca's mother, this didn't add up, since the brutality wasn't typical of someone who just wanted to break in and steal, and she saw too many wounds on her daughter's body. Besides that, some photos and reports from journalists who were the first to arrive at the scene were key to putting the puzzle together. One of these journalists was able to talk to some neighbors, who told him that before the events, they heard Bianca arguing with a man, and shortly after they saw a guy leave, whose description matched Mattia, the Italian. At that moment, Yesenia's fight to find the truth and justice for her daughter began. One of the first irregularities denounced by the woman, which she did first on social media and later in statements to the press, was that the prosecution made a mistake by classifying the case as a robbery with violence, because even though Bianca's computer had disappeared from the scene, other belongings of equal or greater value were still there, like several brand-name shoes and dresses. The version of a crime of passion was also rejected, as her ex-boyfriend was under investigation, but was quickly ruled out since he showed a solid alibi. As I told you, he was at a soccer game at the time of the events. Likewise, it was pointed out that extreme violence had been used against Bianca, and that for the family, it was an intentional femicide. However, the authorities decided not to investigate with a gender perspective. On the other hand, it was also claimed that the scene was not properly secured, as many people entered and left the place, contaminating the evidence. Likewise, it was also discovered that Addie, Bianca's roommate, had taken out a suitcase with her belongings without verifying its contents. So after a month and a half, Yesenia's pressure paid off, and with the support of the mayor of Playa del Carmen, she managed to get the crime reclassified as femicide, which allowed the investigation to be redirected toward that legal hypothesis. During the process, she was supported by several people, and a page dedicated to demanding justice for Bianca and sharing progress or setbacks in the case was created on a well-known social network. Similarly, human rights organizations and feminist movements joined the demands. Thus, it was clear that the community was completely shocked and kept in suspense, waiting for an outcome. However, over time, a shadow of impunity began to form. Still, things started to get a bit strange. And a few months later, the journalist who had arrived first at the scene died under strange circumstances, which added another layer of complexity and mystery to the case. Months turned into years, and there was no progress or major arrests. But Bianca's mother stood firm and didn't give up. She wanted justice for her daughter. Yesenia's criticism focused on the actions of the police and the prosecution. She also claimed that the file was barely a few pages long and was full of contradictions. It was also revealed that the prosecutor in charge of the case threatened her repeatedly, telling her that if she dared to speak to the media, she would shelve her daughter's case. Finally, after much insisting, Yesenia managed to meet with the governor of Quintana Roo, to whom she expressed her dissatisfaction with the investigation. After that meeting and numerous marches, her voice was finally heard. The prosecutor who had Bianca's case was dismissed and a replacement was appointed. That was how, 2 years after Bianca's murder, the appointment of the new prosecutor marked the beginning of a new phase. This official, along with another lawyer and the young woman's mother, began to work. It should be specified here that Yesenia was a lawyer specializing in debt collection. But she also began working on the gender perspective, and she helped a lot in putting her daughter's case together. So they began to gather all the necessary information and review existing evidence. By then, Yesenia had already become an activist and maintained a constant presence in local and national media. As the investigations progressed, Bianca's body had to be exhumed, but no public details were given about what the new forensic exams revealed. As Yesenia hinted in some interviews, the new investigation focused on 2 people close to Bianca's circle, although she refused to give details of the investigation. Mind you, she was still very unhappy with how things were being handled. So she went to the National Human Rights Commission, where she filed a complaint against the previous prosecutor. As a result, the agency was ordered to offer a public apology to Bianca's family. That was how, in February 2023, the case made headlines again after 5 years, when the prosecution finally offered an apology. The agency staff made a brief statement, and then Yesenia addressed the public there, thanking the new prosecutors for their work. However, she emphasized that justice had not yet been served and that she was still pleading for her daughter. So on May 3, 2023, a memorial service was organized in front of Bianca's grave on the day she would have turned 39. During the ceremony, Yesenia thanked the attendees. A week later, on May 10th, the first breakthrough in 5 years was made. A control judge issued an arrest warrant for Addie, Bianca's roommate. The court order gave her 12 hours to turn herself in voluntarily to avoid a public arrest. When the deadline expired, Addie turned herself in, and the prosecution announced she was in Cancun. However, the judge decided not to indict her, considering that the data lacked scientific methodology. Apparently, the judge believed her version of events and didn't notice the inconsistencies in her statements, so she was released 5 days after turning herself in. The arrest and subsequent release of the only person linked to the case provoked mixed reactions. On one hand, Addie's supporters insisted on her innocence and claimed the real killer was free. On the other hand, Bianca's loved ones called her release disappointing. Bianca's mother stated she wouldn't give up, and that although she had lost a battle, the war was not lost. So she gathered her courage all that time and kept going. So 2 more years had to pass before the family could finally see some justice. On March 18, 2025, an indictment hearing was requested again against Addie, and a control judge set April 20th of that same year as the date for the proceeding. It was also warned that in case of non-attendance, an arrest warrant would be requested against Addie. So, the day of the hearing arrived and everyone showed up. Addie was informed of the charges against her, and it was stated that precautionary measures would be requested. The process dragged on for several more months, and on Monday, September 22nd of the same year, the prosecution presented the evidence it had against Addie to a control judge. They said there were expert reports in computer forensics and telecommunications, as well as some criminalistic reports on audio descriptions. The session lasted for over 24 hours, and the defense maintained Addie's innocence and insisted on blaming Bianca's ex-boyfriend. Nevertheless, the judge decided to indict this young woman for her probable responsibility in the crime of aggravated femicide. According to reports, being indicted means the case will be reviewed in a judicial stage. Addie was also placed in pre-trial detention for the duration of the trial, and a supplementary hearing was scheduled for November 22nd of the same year. Besides that, it's also said that there are other people involved. it's believed that the other gym friends, including this guy named Mattia, who, as I told you, many people gave a description very similar to his of the person they supposedly saw entering the house, could be involved. On the other hand, rumors also emerged about a possible romantic relationship between Bianca and Adi, but this was strongly rejected by the young woman's family, who reiterated that there was a bond of companionship and also of tenant and landlord. Although it was said that other hearings would be held, there has been no public information about them, and February 2026 marked 8 years since the crime. As of the making of this video in June 2026, the case still has no final sentence, and some sources claim the process is halted by an injunction filed by Adi's defense, who remains in pre-trial detention in Cancun. In the end, Bianca's story is a reminder of how justice takes a long time to arrive for many people, and how families often fight for many years but, despite this, don't get what they deserve. Justice for those who are no longer here. Let's hope that in the coming months, things can change and Bianca's case can reach a resolution. And well guys, that's it for today's video. A very terrible, very shocking case. Many years have passed and there is still no justice for Bianca. It's really quite difficult for the family, but we hope, as I said, that in the coming months we can finally know what happened. I have nothing left to say, but see you in another case. Bye.